Welcome, mystery fans. Tonight's story takes our beloved Belgian detective to 1930s India, where British colonials and Indian royalty gather for what should be a celebration, but becomes a nightmare. Quick question before we start. What's deadlier, a poisoned drink or a poisoned heart? Let me know in the comments. If you're new here, hit subscribe and join our mystery-loving family. Because when Poirot's on the case, you know things are about to get interesting. So grab your chai, settle in, and let's journey to Colonial Shimla, where murder is about to crash the party at the village bazaar. The morning mist hung heavy over the hill station of Shimla as Hercule Poirot adjusted his perfectly symmetrical bow tie in the mirror of the Cecil Hotel. It was the summer of 1934, and the Belgian detective had come to India at the invitation of an old friend, Colonel Reginald Hastings, who had served in the British Indian Army for 30 years. "Mon ami," Poirot murmured to himself, smoothing his distinctive mustache with practiced precision. What curious circumstance brings Poirot to this most peculiar corner of the empire? A knock at the door interrupted his morning toilette. His valet, a young Indian man named Ravi, entered with a silver tray bearing a telegram. "Sahib, urgent message from Colonel Hastings." Poirot's eyebrows rose as he read. "Poirot, must see you immediately. Strange happenings at Annandale Bazaar. Fear terrible crime imminent. Come at once. Hastings." The Annandale Bazaar was famous throughout Shimla, a sprawling marketplace where British memsahibs mingled with local merchants, where the scent of cardamom and cinnamon mixed with English lavender, and where fortunes in jewels and silks changed hands daily. During the annual summer festival, it became the heart of social life for both the British Raj and wealthy Indian families. Poirot descended from his hotel, his patent leather shoes clicking against the cobblestones. The rickshaw-wallahs called out eagerly, but he preferred to walk, observing the colonial architecture that clung precariously to the mountainside. Tudor-style buildings mixed oddly with Hindu temples, creating a landscape that was neither wholly English nor entirely Indian. At the bazaar, he found Colonel Hastings waiting near the entrance, his weathered face creased with worry. The colonel was a tall man with a military bearing softened by years of Indian sun, and his white mustache drooping in the humid air. "Poirot, thank God you've come." Hastings gripped his hand firmly. "Something wicked is brewing here. I can feel it in my bones." "But what exactly troubles you, mon colonel?" Hastings led him through the maze of stalls. 3 incidents in as many days. First, the Maharani of Palpur's prized ruby necklace vanished from a locked box. Then, threatening letters appeared under doors of several prominent families. And yesterday, he paused dramatically. A sacred idol was found defaced in the temple. "Interesting," Poirot mused, his gray cells already beginning their work. "And you believe these incidents are connected?" "They must be. The summer festival begins tomorrow. The governor himself will attend, along with every important family in the region. The Ashworth Singhs, the Duttas, the O'Briens. Old money and new, British and Indian alike." As they walked deeper into the bazaar, Poirot observed the controlled chaos around him. Merchants haggled over prices, children ran between the stalls, stealing sweets, and everywhere there was the press of humanity. Yet underneath the normal bustle, he detected an undercurrent of tension. "Tell me," Poirot said, pausing at a stall selling magnificent cashmere shawls, "who discovered these incidents?" "That's the peculiar thing. Hastings replied. Each was found by Mrs. Lakshmi Sharma, the bazaar's most successful merchant. She deals in everything from spices to sapphires. Some say she knows every secret in Shimla. Poirot's interest sharpened. In his experience, those who discovered crimes often had more knowledge than they admitted. And this Mrs. Sharma, she is trusted? By some. Others say she's too clever by half. Married an Englishman years ago, caused quite a scandal. He died mysteriously 5 years later, leaving her his fortune. As if summoned by their conversation, a woman emerged from an ornate shop ahead. She was perhaps 40, dressed in an elegant fusion of English fashion and Indian tradition, a silk sari paired with Victorian jewelry. Her dark eyes held intelligence and something else. Calculation? Colonel Hastings, she said in perfectly accented English, and this must be the famous Hercule Poirot. I heard you had arrived. News travels fast in Shimla, madame, Poirot observed. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. In the bazaar, Monsieur Poirot, secrets are the most valuable currency. And tomorrow, during the festival, I fear all our secrets will demand their price. As she glided away, Poirot felt the familiar tingle that preceded his most challenging cases. Death was coming to the village bazaar. The only question was who would be its victim. Chapter 2. The Gathering of Suspects. The morning of the summer festival dawned blood-red over Shimla's peaks, an ominous portent that did not escape Hercule Poirot's notice. He had spent the previous evening studying the layout of Annandale Bazaar, creating mental maps of its serpentine passages and hidden corners. Now, dressed in his finest white suit despite the Indian heat, he prepared to attend the festival's opening ceremony. The bazaar had been transformed overnight. Marigold garlands hung from every archway, brass bells tinkled in the mountain breeze, and colorful rangoli patterns decorated the ground. A magnificent shamiana, a traditional tent of red and gold, had been erected in the central square, where the governor would give his address. Colonel Hastings met Poirot at the entrance, accompanied by a young English woman in a cream dress that seemed to wilt in the humidity. Poirot, may I present my niece, Diana Hastings. She arrived from London last month. Diana extended a gloved hand, though Poirot noticed it trembled slightly. Mr. Poirot, Uncle has told me so much about your remarkable abilities. Mademoiselle is too kind, Poirot replied, observing the dark circles beneath her powder. You find India agreeable? It's quite different from Mayfair, she said carefully, her eyes darting toward the gathering crowd. As they entered the shamiana, Poirot catalogued the assembled guests like a botanist examining specimens. At the head table sat Governor Sir Reginald Ashworth Singh, a corpulent man whose Anglo-Indian heritage had proven advantageous in navigating colonial politics. Beside him, his much younger wife, Priscilla, fanned herself vigorously while eyeing the jewels adorning the other ladies. The governor married for money, Hastings whispered. Priscilla brought a fortune from her father's indigo plantations. Some say the governor's gambling debts would have ruined him otherwise. To their left sat the Dutta family, old Bengali aristocracy who had prospered under British rule. The patriarch, Rajesh Dutta, wore a pristine white dhoti and gold-rimmed spectacles, looking every inch the successful barrister. His son, Vikram, however, seemed agitated, constantly checking his pocket watch and glancing toward the bazaar entrance. Oh, young Vikram fancies himself a revolutionary, Hastings explained. Oxford-educated but filled with talk of independence, his father despairs. Mrs. Lakshmi Sharma held court at another table, surrounded by admirers and clients. Today she wore emerald green silk that complemented the extraordinary necklace at her throat, each stone seemingly captured from the depths of the ocean itself. "Those emeralds," Diana breathed. "They must be worth a fortune." "Everything about Mrs. Sharma is worth a fortune," a crisp voice interrupted. They turned to find Captain James O'Brien, still in military uniform despite having left active service. His face bore the permanent sunburn of the career soldier, and his eyes held the hardness of a man who had seen too much. "O'Brien?" Hastings nodded stiffly. Poirot sensed old tension between the men. "Come to watch the circus, Hastings?" O'Brien's smile was sharp. "Or perhaps your famous detective friend suspects one of us of planning something nasty." Before anyone could respond, a gong sounded. The governor rose to speak, but as he opened his mouth, a scream pierced the air. All heads turned toward the sound. It had come from the direction of the temple. The assembly rushed outside in a confusion of silk and uniforms. There, at the temple steps, stood the priest, his white robes splattered with red. But it was not blood. Someone had thrown vermilion powder, the sacred color, all over the temple walls in grotesque patterns. Written in the powder were words in Hindi that made several Indian guests gasp. "What does it say?" Poirot asked urgently. Vikram Dutta translated, his voice tight. "Death comes for the corrupt. Today, a justice will be served." The governor's face had turned ashen. "Clear the bazaar immediately. Cancel the festival." "Non, non." Poirot stepped forward. "That would be most unwise. Whoever did this wants chaos, fear. We must continue as normal while I investigate." "And why should we listen to you?" Captain O'Brien demanded. Mrs. Sharma's voice cut through the crowd. "Because Mr. Poirot is correct. I found something this morning." She held up a small cloth doll, dressed like a British soldier, but with pins stuck through its heart. "This was at my shop door. Someone means to strike during the festival when we are all here." Poirot examined the doll carefully. The craftsmanship was distinctive: silk thread, detailed embroidery, and most telling, a small mark at the base that looked like a maker's signature. "Tell me," he said slowly, "who in the bazaar makes such dolls?" An uncomfortable silence fell. Finally, Diana Hastings spoke in a small voice. I've been taking lessons from the widow who sells toys near the fountain, but I would never." "Of course not, mademoiselle," Poirot soothed. "But perhaps we should visit this widow, n'est-ce pas?" As the crowd reluctantly returned to the Shamiana, Poirot noticed one significant absence. The Maharani of Palpur, whose ruby necklace had been stolen, had not attended. Most curious indeed. Chapter 3. The Widow's Tale. The toy seller's shop crouched in the oldest part of the bazaar, where the stones remembered the time before the British, when Shimla was merely a small village dedicated to the goddess Shimla. Poirot navigated the narrow alley carefully, his patent leather shoes slipping on the moss-covered stones. Colonel Hastings and Diana followed, the young woman clutching her uncle's arm. The widow, Kamala Devi, sat cross-legged on a worn carpet, surrounded by hundreds of dolls. Some were simple cloth creations for poor children, others elaborate figures dressed in miniature versions of royal finery. Her fingers, gnarled with age, worked continuously, bringing life to fabric and thread. She looked up at their approach, her milky eyes suggesting cataracts, yet she seemed to see them perfectly. "The foreign detective comes," she said in Hindi, which Hastings translated. "I wondered when you would arrive." Poirot presented the sinister doll. "Madame, this is your work." She took it in her ancient hands, feeling the embroidery. "The technique is mine, yes, but the hatred sewn into it, that belongs to another." She gestured for them to sit. "The 3 people have learned my craft. The Memsahib here," she nodded toward Diana. "The governor's wife, who thinks such knowledge makes her seem cultured, and, Poirot prompted gently. "One who came in darkness, face covered, offering gold for lessons. 3 weeks ago, spoke in whispers. But the voice," she paused, "the voice carried pain. Old pain, Sahib, the kind that rots the soul." Diana shifted uncomfortably. "I remember seeing someone leaving one evening. They bumped into me but didn't stop to apologize. There was a strange smell, like almonds." Poirot's mustache twitched. The smell of bitter almonds often meant one thing. This mysterious student, did they say anything significant? Kamala Devi reached behind her and pulled out a small ledger. "They left this behind. I cannot read English, but perhaps—" Hastings took the ledger, his face paling as he read. "Good God, it's a list of names, everyone at the festival today, and beside each name, a sin. The governor, betrayal of trust, Captain O'Brien, blood money, Mrs. Sharma, murder unpunished." He looked up. "My name is here too. It says willful blindness." "And Mademoiselle Diana?" Poirot asked quietly. "Shameful secret." Hastings read reluctantly, avoiding his niece's eyes. Diana's face had turned white. How could anyone know? She stopped herself. Before Poirot could pursue this interesting revelation, a commotion erupted outside. A young Indian boy, barefoot and breathless, burst into the shop. "Sahib, come quickly. The Maharani of Palpur. She has arrived at the festival. And she's making terrible accusations." They hurried back to find chaos in the Shamiana. The Maharani, a formidable woman draped in purple silk and dripping with jewels, though notably not her famous rubies, stood before the assembly like an avenging goddess. "One of you is a thief," she declared. "My rubies did not simply vanish. They were stolen by someone here. Someone who knew exactly when I would be at the temple for morning prayers." "Your Highness," the governor attempted to placate her, "we have searched everywhere." "Searched?" She laughed bitterly. "While you searched, I conducted my own investigation. My maid saw someone in European dress leaving my chambers that morning, someone who had no business being in the palace quarters." Captain O'Brien stepped forward aggressively. "You're suggesting one of us British—" "I'm suggesting," the Maharani cut him off, "that someone here needed money desperately, someone whose debts have become uncomfortable." Several people shifted uneasily. Poirot noticed Mrs. Sharma, watching with particular interest, her hand unconsciously touching her emerald necklace. "Perhaps," Mrs. Sharma said smoothly, "we should ask why Your Highness kept such valuable jewels in a simple locked box rather than the palace safe." The Maharani's eyes flashed. "Are you implying I staged my own theft?" "I imply nothing. I merely observe that insurance payments for stolen jewels can be quite generous." The 2 women faced each other like cobras preparing to strike. The tension in the tent could have been cut with a kukri. Suddenly, the lights went out. In the confusion, there was a crash, a scream, and the sound of breaking glass. When the servants managed to relight the oil lamps moments later, a shocking sight met their eyes. Captain O'Brien lay on the ground, clutching his throat, his face turning purple. Beside him, a shattered glass of lassie pooled on the carpet, its sweet smell mixing with the unmistakable scent of bitter almonds. "Poison!" someone screamed. Poirot knelt beside the captain, but it was too late. James O'Brien's eyes stared sightlessly at the tense, decorated ceiling. In his clenched fist was a piece of paper. Carefully, Poirot extracted it. Written in the same hand as the ledger were 4 words: "The first of many." Diana Hastings fainted. The Maharani stood frozen. And Mrs. Lakshmi Sharma, Poirot noticed with great interest, had somehow managed to disappear entirely during the blackout. Chapter 4. Secrets in the Spice Market. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the bazaar as Poirot stood in the cordoned area where Captain O'Brien had died. The British authorities had arrived. Inspector Thompson of the Shimla police, a man whose red face suggested a close friendship with whiskey, and whose incompetence was immediately apparent. "Clear case of native uprising," Thompson declared, mopping his brow. "These independence wallahs, mark my words, that young Duta boy was probably behind it." "Inspector," Poirot said patiently, "perhaps we should examine the evidence before making accusations, no?" While Thompson blustered, Poirot studied the scene. The lassie glass. Only O'Brien's showed traces of cyanide. The killer had specifically targeted him. But how had they known which glass he would take? "La, mon ami Hastings," Poirot called. "At these gatherings, is there a particular order of service?" Hastings, still pale from the shock, nodded. "Always. Military precision. O'Brien, being the senior military man present after the governor, would have been served third. Allure, someone familiar with protocol. This narrows our field considerably." Young Vikram Dutta was being questioned nearby, Thompson looming over him threateningly. "You were heard arguing with Captain O'Brien yesterday." "Half of Shimla argued with O'Brien," Vikram replied defiantly. "He was extracting illegal taxes from Indian merchants, calling it protection money. My father has documents proving—" "Enough!" his father, Rajesh Dutta, interrupted sharply. "Inspector, my son was standing beside me when the lights went out. He could not have poisoned anyone." Poirot left them to their arguments and ventured deeper into the bazaar. He found Mrs. Sharma in her private office above the spice market, calmly sipping tea, as if murder hadn't just occurred below. "Monsieur Poirot," she said without looking up, "I wondered when you would come." "You disappeared most conveniently, madame," she smiled. "I've learned to avoid chaos when possible. Bad for business." She gestured to a chair. "You want to know about O'Brien? Very well. He was a parasite. 3 months ago, he came to me demanding money, claimed he knew something about my husband's death." "And did he?" Her dark eyes glittered dangerously. "My husband died of cholera, Mr. Poirot. Whatever O'Brien thought he knew was fantasy." "Yet you paid him?" "Once. Then I told him if he approached me again, I would reveal his own secrets, his debts to the Chinese opium dealers, his forged military records, his inappropriate interest in young Indian girls." Before Poirot could respond, Diana Hastings appeared in the doorway, breathless. "Mr. Poirot, you must come. They found something in Captain O'Brien's quarters." O'Brien's rooms were in the military cantonment, spartanly furnished but for one incongruous element, a collection of jeweled items poorly hidden beneath his bed. Among them, glittering like drops of blood, were the Maharani's missing rubies. "There," Inspector Thompson crowed. "The blackguard was the thief himself, Case closed." "I think not," Poirot murmured, examining the jewels. "These rubies, they are excellent work, but—" The Maharani, who had been summoned, gasped as she held them. "These are not my rubies. Yeah, they're paste, clever copies, but fake." "Most interesting," Poirot mused. "So we have a thief who stole real rubies and a dead man who possessed fake ones. The plot, as you English say, thickens." That evening, Poirot gathered everyone in the Shamiana again, despite protests. The governor was particularly agitated. "This is madness, Poirot. A killer is loose." "Precisely why we must continue," Poirot replied. "The murderer expects us to scatter in fear. Instead, we give them another opportunity, and Poirot will be watching." As the sun set, painting the mountains crimson, the festival resumed with subdued energy. Merchants displayed their wares half-heartedly, and conversations were conducted in whispers. Poirot positioned himself where he could observe everyone. It was then he noticed something peculiar. Diana Hastings kept checking a particular stall, one selling traditional medicines. The proprietor, an elderly Tibetan man, seemed to be expecting her. They exchanged brief words, and Diana palmed something small. Following at a distance, Poirot watched Diana hurry toward the temple. But instead of entering, she slipped around to the back where the old burial ground lay. Among the British headstones and Hindu memorial stones, she knelt at one particular grave, relatively fresh, no more than 5 years old. The headstone read, "Thomas Sharma, beloved husband, died 1929. Diana placed what appeared to be flowers at the grave, but Poirot saw her extract something from beneath a loose stone. A letter, perhaps? As she read it, her shoulders began to shake with sobs. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said gently, stepping from the shadows. Diana spun around, the letter clutched to her chest. "Mr. Poirot, I can explain." "I think," said Poirot kindly, "you had better, for I believe your shameful secret may be the key to everything." Diana's confession was about to unlock the mystery's heart, but neither of them noticed the figure watching from behind a mausoleum, a figure whose hand gripped another poisoned blade. Chapter 5. The Confession in the Graveyard. The moon had risen full over the cemetery, casting an ethereal glow on the weathered headstones. Diana Hastings stood trembling before Poirot, the letter in her hand fluttering like a captured bird. In the distance, the sounds of the festival seemed to belong to another world entirely. "You knew Thomas Sharma?" Poirot said gently. It was not a question. Diana nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I met him in London 5 years ago. He was studying law at the Inns of Court. He was brilliant, charming, and—" She paused. "Already married." "Ah." Poirot's voice held no judgment. "And you loved him?" "Desperately. When he returned to India, I thought I would die from the grief. Then, 6 months later, I received word that he actually had died. Cholera, they said. I had to come, had to see his grave, to say goodbye properly. That's why I accepted Uncle's invitation." "But that is not all, is it, mademoiselle?" Diana shook her head. "When I arrived, I started hearing whispers. The servants, the merchants, they all hinted that Thomas's death wasn't natural. Some said Mrs. Sharma discovered our affair and poisoned him. Others claimed Captain O'Brien was involved somehow. And these letters you have been retrieving. Thomas hid them here before he died. Letters documenting O'Brien's corruption, the governor's illegal dealings, and something about a conspiracy involving the ruby trade. He was going to expose them all, but then a twig snapped behind them. Both turned to see Vikram Dutta emerging from the shadows, but his usual revolutionary fire was replaced by something darker. "Miss Hastings," he said formally. "Mr. Poirot, I thought I might find you here." "Monsieur Dutta." Poirot observed his tense posture, the way his hand remained in his coat pocket. "You also knew Thomas Sharma?" "He was my friend," Vikram said bitterly. "We were going to change things together, expose the rot in both British and Indian society. But they killed him for it." "They?" "The whole corrupt system. O'Brien was blackmailing half the bazaar. The governor was embezzling from the treasury. Even my own father." He stopped, pain flashing across his face. "My father knew and did nothing because it was profitable." "And Mrs. Sharma?" Poirot prompted. "She loved her husband, despite his infidelity." Vikram glanced at Diana. "But love and murder are not incompatible, are they?" Suddenly, a scream pierced the night, high, terrified, and abruptly cut short. It came from the direction of the temple. The three of them ran toward the sound, Poirot surprisingly agile despite his age. They found chaos. The Maharani of Palpur lay on the temple steps. Her purple silk sari spread around her like spilled wine. But she was not dead, merely fainted. Standing over her, he holding a bloody kukri, was Colonel Hastings. "It's not what it looks like," Hastings gasped. "I found her like this. Someone attacked her. I grabbed the weapon when I heard footsteps running away." The Maharani stirred, moaning. There was blood on her shoulder, a shallow cut, not life-threatening. As Poirot helped her sit up, she gasped, "My room! Someone was in my room. The safe." Inspector Thompson arrived, huffing and puffing. "Colonel Hastings, I'm afraid I must—" "You must do nothing," Poirot interrupted firmly. "Colonel, who else knew you would be patrolling this area tonight?" "Only the governor and—" Hastings paused, realization dawning. "And Mrs. Sharma. She insisted on knowing the security arrangements." They rushed to the Maharani's guest quarters in the state building. The safe stood open, empty. But Poirot's attention was drawn to something else. A small piece of green silk caught on the safe's edge and a distinctive earring on the floor. "This earring," the Maharani said weakly. "I've seen it before. Mrs. Sharma wore its match this morning." "But why would she need to steal?" Diana asked. "She's wealthy." "Perhaps," Poirot said thoughtfully. "She is not stealing, but retrieving. Tell me, Your Highness, what else was in your safe besides jewels?" The Maharani's face went pale. "Documents. Private documents about business arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" Poirot pressed. I had proof that someone was smuggling opium through the jewelry trade. Hollow gems filled with the drug, shipped to China. I was going to expose it, but you were being paid to stay quiet," Vikram said disgustedly. Just like everyone else in this cursed place." Poirot stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "We must find Mrs. Sharma immediately. She may be in great danger." "Danger?" Thompson scoffed. "She's the murderer." "Non-inspector. She is another victim, or about to be. The real killer is someone else entirely, someone who has been watching, waiting, collecting everyone's sins. Someone who came to the widow 3 weeks ago to learn about making dolls, someone who knew exactly when to strike." As they hurried back toward the bazaar, Poirot suddenly stopped. "The festival tent. Everyone will gather there for the midnight ceremony. That is where it will happen." "What will happen?" Hastings demanded. "The final act of this tragedy. The murderer plans to reveal themselves tonight. But first, they intend to eliminate the last witness to the original crime. In the distance, the temple bells began to toll midnight. As they ran toward the Shamiana, none of them noticed the figure on the roof above, cyanide-laced blade glinting in the moonlight, preparing for the last kill. Chapter 6. The Midnight Revelation. The Shamiana glowed like a paper lantern against the dark mountain sky, its red and gold fabric trembling in the night wind. Inside, the remaining guests had gathered for the midnight ceremony, a tradition meant to bless the festival, now transformed into a vigil for the dead. Poirot entered to find an extraordinary tableau. Mrs. Lakshmi Sharma sat at the center, her emerald necklace gone, her usually immaculate hair disheveled. Around her stood the governor, his wife Priscilla, Rajesh Dutta, and several merchants, all watching her with expressions ranging from suspicion to fear. "Ah, Mrs. Sharma," the governor was saying, his florid face glistening with sweat. "How convenient that you appear now, after the Maharani's documents have vanished." "I took nothing," Mrs. Sharma said quietly, but her voice carried steel. "Though I know who did." "Enough," Inspector Thompson pushed forward. "Mrs. Sharma, you're under arrest for the murder of Captain O'Brien and the attempted murder of—" "She did not kill O'Brien," Poirot's voice cut through the chaos. "Though she knows who did, n'est-ce pas, madame?" All eyes turned to the Belgian detective as he walked slowly to the center of the tent, his manner deliberate, theatrical even. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have here a most remarkable case. A murder planned not for days or weeks, but for years. A revenge served. As you English say, very cold indeed." He turned to address the assembled group. "Let us begin with Thomas Sharma's death 5 years ago. Not cholera, as reported, but murder. The question is, who killed him and why?" "This is preposterous," the governor blustered. "The man died of disease." "None. He was poisoned, slowly, carefully, with small doses of arsenic administered over weeks. The symptoms mimic cholera, most convenient. But who had access to him daily? Who could ensure he took the poison without suspicion?" Diana gasped. "You're not suggesting Mrs. Sharma." "I suggest nothing. I state facts. Thomas Sharma was investigating a smuggling ring, opium hidden in hollow jewels, shipped under cover of legitimate trade. He had evidence that would have destroyed several prominent families." Vikram Dutta stepped forward. "My friend died for the truth." "Your friend died," Poirot said carefully, "because he trusted the wrong person, someone who appeared supportive of his cause but was actually part of the conspiracy." The tent fell silent, except for the flickering of oil lamps. Poirot walked to a small table where the evidence had been assembled. The poisoned glass, the doll, the fake rubies. Captain O'Brien was a blackmailer, yes, but also a fool. He stole the fake rubies thinking they were real, copies made to facilitate the smuggling operation. The real rubies had already been hollowed out, filled with opium, and shipped. When he tried to blackmail the wrong person with this knowledge, he signed his death warrant. "But who?" Hastings demanded. "Who is behind all this?" Poirot picked up the cloth doll. This was made by someone who learned from the widow 3 weeks ago. Someone who knew about Diana's affair, about the governor's debts, about everyone's secrets. Someone who had been watching, waiting, planning the perfect revenge. He turned suddenly to face Priscilla Ashworth Singh. The governor's wife had gone very pale, her fan falling from nerveless fingers. Is it not true, madame, that before your marriage you were known by another name? Priscilla O'Brien, Captain James O'Brien's sister? Gasps echoed through the tent. The governor stared at his wife in shock. That's impossible, he stammered. Priscilla's maiden name was Thornton. A lie, Poirot said simply. She changed her name after her first marriage to Thomas Sharma. The revelation hit like thunder. Diana crumpled into a chair. Mrs. Lakshmi Sharma's eyes blazed with sudden understanding. You! Mrs. Sharma pointed at Priscilla. You were the woman Thomas met in England before our marriage. You followed him here. Priscilla stood slowly, her facade crumbling. He promised to marry me. Promised. Then he chose her instead. She laughed bitterly. So I became someone else, married for position, and waited. When Thomas started his investigation, threatening to expose my brother's crimes, I had to act. So you poisoned him slowly, Poirot said, making it look like cholera. He deserved it. He betrayed me, and my brother, my stupid, greedy brother, was going to ruin everything with his blackmail schemes. The family reputation, my position, all of it. But why frame Mrs. Sharma? Diana asked through her tears. Priscilla's smile was cold. Ah, she had everything that should have been mine. Let her hang for the murders. Justice, finally. Suddenly, Priscilla grabbed a knife from the fruit table. But before she could move, a shot rang out. The knife fell from her hand as she clutched her shoulder. Standing in the entrance, smoking pistol in hand, was the supposedly deceased Captain O'Brien. "Hello, sister," he said grimly. "Surprised to see me?" Chapter 7. The Dead Man's Tale. The Shamiana erupted in chaos. Women screamed, men shouted, and Inspector Thompson looked as if he might faint. Captain James O'Brien stood in the entrance, very much alive, though his face was haggard and his uniform torn. Behind him stood 2 Indian policemen in khaki uniforms. "Impossible!" the governor gasped. "We saw you die. Oh, the poison." "You saw what Monsieur Poirot intended you to see," O'Brien said, keeping his pistol trained on his sister. "A performance worthy of the London stage." Poirot stepped forward, his mustache twitching with satisfaction. "Mes amis, allow me to explain. When I examined Captain O'Brien earlier, I detected something curious. The poison symptoms were theatrical, yes, but not fatal. The bitter almond smell was too strong, the convulsions too dramatic. Real cyanide death is quicker, quieter." "You mean?" Hastings began. "I mean Captain O'Brien took a small dose of a substance that mimics cyanide's effects, courtesy of the Tibetan medicine seller's special preparation. Enough to seem dead to a cursory examination, but not enough to actually kill. A risk, certainly, but necessary to draw out the real killer." O'Brien nodded grimly. "Though when Poirot approached me this morning with evidence of my sister's crimes, I didn't believe it at first, but the pieces fit. Her arrival in Shimla just before Thomas Sharma fell ill, her sudden wealth after his death, her insistence on knowing everyone's secrets." Priscilla laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "My brilliant brother, the blackmailer and thief. You were destroying everything I'd built." "I was a fool," O'Brien admitted. "Greedy and corrupt, but I'm not a murderer. When I stole what I thought were the Maharani's rubies, I discovered they were fake. I started investigating and found records of the real smuggling operation, hidden in Thomas Sharma's old legal files. Files my sister thought she'd destroyed." Mrs. Lakshmi Sharma stepped forward, her face a mask of controlled fury. You killed my husband because he rejected you 20 years ago?" "Rejected?" Priscilla spat. "He seduced me in London, promised marriage, then abandoned me for an Indian fortune. Do you know what that did to me? A ruined woman with no prospects except to hide my shame and reinvent myself?" "So you became Priscilla Thornton," Poirot continued. "Invented a false background with forged documents and eventually married the governor for his position. But the rage never died, did it?" "It grew," Priscilla admitted, her voice eerily calm now. "Every day, seeing Thomas with her, watching them prosper while I played the dutiful memsahib to a gambling fool of a husband. When Thomas began investigating the opium trade, I saw my chance. He was getting close to discovering my involvement. I'd been using my husband's position to facilitate shipments." The governor sank into a chair. "You used me. Our entire marriage." "You used my money," Priscilla snapped. "A fair trade." Vikram Dutta pushed forward. "But why involve all of us? The threatening letters, the vandalism?" "Misdirection," Poirot answered. "Madame needed chaos, suspicion falling on everyone, the stolen rubies, the defaced temple, all to create an atmosphere of fear, where one more crime would seem part of a pattern rather than personal revenge." "She learned doll-making to plant evidence," Diana added, understanding dawning. "The doll with pins was meant to implicate the Indian independence movement." "Precisely," Poirot nodded. "But Madame made one crucial error. On the ledger she accidentally left at the widow's shop, the handwriting was too perfect, too masculine. A woman imitating a man's hand often presses too hard, leaves telltale flourishes." Inspector Thompson finally found his voice. "Mrs. Ashworth Singh, you're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Sharma and the attempted murder of the Maharani of Palpur." "Wait," the Maharani spoke up, holding her wounded shoulder. "The attack on me, that wasn't her. I saw my attacker's face briefly. It was a man." Everyone turned to look at the assembled men. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Of course, the conspiracy has another player, someone who knew Priscilla's plans and used them for their own purposes, someone who needed those documents from your safe not to hide evidence, but to steal it." His gaze fell on Rajesh Dutta, who had remained remarkably quiet throughout the revelations. "Monsieur Dutta, you have been most silent, yet your son mentioned you knew about the corruption but did nothing. Why?" Rajesh Dutta straightened his spectacles with trembling hands. I am a lawyer, Monsieur Poirot. I maintain confidentiality." "Papa," Vikram said slowly, horror dawning on his face. "You weren't just silent. You were their legal advisor. You helped structure the smuggling operation." The elderly barrister seemed to age 10 years in an instant. "I had no choice. They had evidence of my own youthful indiscretions, forgeries I'd committed to pay for your mother's medical treatment. If exposed, you would have been ruined, son. Everything I built would have crumbled." "So you attacked the Maharani?" Poirot pressed. "I only meant to retrieve the documents." "Oh, but she woke up, struggled. I panicked." The sound of marching feet announced the arrival of more police. As they surrounded the conspirators, Priscilla made one last desperate attempt. She grabbed a lamp and hurled it at the tent fabric. The oil splashed and flames began to lick up the shamiana's walls. "If I burn, you all burn with me," she screamed. Chapter 8. Fire and Truth. The shamiana erupted into an inferno with terrifying speed. The oil-soaked fabric, decades old and dry as parchment, caught flame like paper. Orange tongues of fire raced up the tent poles, and black smoke began to fill the space. Panic seized the crowd as people pushed toward the exits. "Everyone remain calm," Poirot commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Oh, exit in orderly fashion, ladies and elderly first." But Priscilla Ashworth Singh had positioned herself between the main entrance and the crowd, a second oil lamp in her hand, her eyes wild with desperation. "No one leaves until I have safe passage." Captain O'Brien moved toward his sister, but she smashed the second lamp at his feet, creating a wall of flame between them. "Stay back, James. You were always weak, just like father." Through the smoke, Poirot noticed Mrs. Lakshmi Sharma moving with surprising calm toward a side wall of the tent. She produced a small knife from her sari and began cutting through the fabric with practiced efficiency. "This way," she called. "Quickly!" The crowd surged toward the new exit. Vikram Dutta helped his father, despite everything. Diana supported the wounded Maharani. Sir Colonel Hastings tried to reach the governor, who stood transfixed, watching his wife with horror. "Reginald," Priscilla called to her husband, "you pathetic fool. Did you really think a woman like me could love you? You were merely convenient, a title, a position, access to shipping routes." The governor's face crumpled. 20 years? All of it a lie? "Every kiss, every embrace," she laughed maniacally. "I closed my eyes and imagined Thomas, then later imagined your death." A burning beam crashed down, separating Priscilla from the others. She was trapped in a corner, flames advancing from all sides. For a moment, her madness seemed to clear, replaced by terror. "James!" she screamed. "Help me!" O'Brien looked at his sister through the flames, conflict tearing at his features. Then, without hesitation, he grabbed a water barrel, doused himself, and plunged through the fire. Moments later, he emerged, dragging Priscilla, both their clothes smoldering. They collapsed outside just as the entire shamiana folded in on itself like a dying creature, sending sparks shooting into the night sky. As the fire brigade arrived with their hand pumps and water wagons, Poirot surveyed the assembled suspects and witnesses. They stood in the flickering light of the dying fire, some in torn finery, others covered in soot, all bearing the shock of near death and devastating revelations. Inspector Thompson, his uniform ruined, immediately placed Priscilla in irons despite her burns. "Mrs. Ashworth Singh, you're under arrest for murder, attempted murder, arson." "Inspector," Poirot interrupted, "there is still one more truth to be revealed." Everyone turned to him, and exhausted but unable to resist the Belgian's dramatic timing. "Mrs. Lakshmi Sharma," Poirot said gently, "you knew, didn't you? You knew your husband was being poisoned." The widow stood tall despite everything. "I suspected. Thomas grew ill so gradually, and always after dining with her." She gestured at Priscilla. "But I had no proof, and who would believe an Indian woman accusing a Memsahib?" "So you conducted your own investigation," Poirot continued. "The emerald necklace you wore, it belonged to Priscilla once, didn't it?" Mrs. Sharma smiled coldly. "Payment for her crimes. I took it from her room the night Thomas died. She couldn't report it stolen without revealing she'd been at our house." "You've been watching her for 5 years," Diana said in wonderment. "Gathering evidence." "Everything," Mrs. Sharma confirmed. "Oh, every illegal shipment, every forged document, every bribe. I was going to destroy her completely, but then O'Brien started his blackmail, and she began her new murder plot. I had to adjust my plans." Captain O'Brien, still coughing from smoke, asked, "The fake rubies, you planted them in my room?" To keep you alive, Mrs. Sharma replied. I knew my sister-in-law would try to kill you, but if you were already suspected of theft, you'd be watched, protected. I didn't anticipate Monsieur Poirot's clever deception. Poirot bowed slightly. Madame, you have been playing a very long game. Justice delayed, she said, looking at Priscilla with hatred, but not denied. The governor, who had remained silent, finally spoke. The smuggling operation, how extensive is it? Rajesh Dutta, resigned to his fate, answered. 3 shipping companies, 5 jewelry merchants, routes to China, Burma, and Singapore. The documentation the Maharani had would expose it all. Documentation I've already provided to the Viceroy's office, the Maharani announced. Copies, of course. One learns to be careful. As dawn began to break over the mountains, painting the peaks gold and rose, the full extent of the conspiracy became clear. What had begun as a woman's revenge had uncovered a network of corruption reaching the highest levels of the Raj. Monsieur Poirot, Diana said quietly, how did you know? How did you see through it all? Poirot smiled, touching his mustache. Because, mademoiselle, in every crime of passion, one must look not at the emotions displayed, but at those hidden. Priscilla showed anger at many, she but true hatred for only one, the woman who had what she felt was rightfully hers. As the police wagons arrived to take away the conspirators, Poirot noticed one person missing from the assembled crowd. Where, he asked suddenly, is the widow who makes dolls? Chapter 9. The Widow's Blessing. The sun had fully risen over Shimla when Hercule Poirot made his way back through the devastated bazaar. Charred remains of the shamiana stood like blackened bones against the morning sky. Merchants were already beginning to clear debris, their resilience a testament to the enduring spirit of the marketplace. Poirot found the widow Kamala Devi exactly where he had first met her, sitting cross-legged in her shop, fingers still working on a new doll. But this time, her milky eyes were clear, focused. The cataracts had been an illusion. Monsieur Poirot, she said in perfect English, setting aside her work. I wondered if you would return. Poirot sat before her, studying her ancient face with new interest. You are not what you appear, madame. She smiled, and years seemed to fall away from her features. Very little in Shimla is as you've discovered. Would you like some tea? It's been a long night. As she poured from an elegant porcelain service that seemed incongruous with her humble surroundings, Poirot said, You knew Thomas Sharma. I knew his mother, she corrected. We were friends in our youth, before the British came, when Shimla was still small. She died giving birth to Thomas, and I watched over him from a distance. You knew Priscilla had returned from England. The moment she arrived, a mother's friend recognizes threats to her child, even grown. I watched her bewitch Thomas, saw through her transformation into Priscilla Thornton, witnessed her marriage to the governor. Yet you did nothing. Kamala Devi's eyes flashed. I did everything. Who do you think warned Thomas about the poison? Who helped him hide those documents? Who ensured Mrs. Lakshmi found evidence of her husband's true killer? Poirot's eyebrows rose. The mysterious person who came for doll-making lessons 3 weeks ago was Priscilla, yes, but I knew she would come. The festival always brings out the demons in people. I made sure she left that ledger behind, though she never knew she'd dropped it. You were guiding the investigation from the shadows. I am old, Monsieur Poirot, too old for courts and British justice that favors their own. But I knew if the right detective came, If someone with eyes to see examined the evidence, she gestured at him with respect. Your reputation reaches even our mountains. Colonel Hastings's invitation to me, that was not coincidence. She smiled mysteriously. The colonel is a good man who sometimes needs guidance about which friends to invite for the summer season. Poirot laughed, delighted by the revelation. Madame, you are what I believe is called a puppet master. I prefer guardian, she said. This bazaar, these people, they are my responsibility. When serpents enter our garden, they must be removed. And young Diana, her presence here? An innocent caught in an old tragedy, but perhaps finding love's grave will help her find love again. The young heal, given time. From outside came voices. Colonel Hastings appeared with Diana, Mrs. Lakshmi Sharma, and, surprisingly, Vikram Dutta. They all looked worn, but somehow cleansed, as if the fire had burned away more than just the tent. Poirot, Hastings called. The authorities want your statement. Thompson's been sacked. Turned out he was taking bribes, too. They're bringing in someone from Delhi. In a moment, mon ami. Poirot turned back to Kamala Devi. One more question, madame. The real rubies, where are they? She laughed, a sound like temple bells. Where they've always been, adorning the goddess Shimla in the temple. The Maharani made an offering years ago for her husband's health. She simply forgot and was too proud to admit it. I reminded her this morning. As they prepared to leave, Kamala Devi called out, Monsieur Poirot, you understand that justice and law are not always the same. I have learned, madame, that justice sometimes requires more creativity than law allows. She pressed something into his hand, a small doll, exquisitely made, with a distinctive mustache and egg-shaped head. To remember Shimla by. 3 days later, as Poirot's train pulled away from Shimla station, he watched the hill station recede into morning mist. Colonel Hastings had decided to stay longer to help Diana through the legal proceedings. Mrs. Lakshmi Sharma had offered to return the emerald necklace to Priscilla's estate, but the authorities ruled it fair compensation for her suffering. Priscilla would hang for Thomas Sharma's murder. British law was unforgiving of those who poisoned their own kind, even for crimes of passion. Her brother James had been stripped of his rank, but avoided prison by turning Queen's evidence. The governor had resigned in disgrace. Rajesh Dutta faced disbarment and imprisonment, while his son Vikram had emerged with his idealism intact, but tempered by wisdom. The truth, mes amis, Poirot murmured to his reflection in the train window, is like these mountains. Beautiful, terrible, and impossible to ignore, once revealed. He touched the little doll in his pocket and smiled. In his long career, he had solved many mysteries, but few had taught him as much about the complexity of justice. The British Raj would continue for now, but in the fire at the bazaar, he had seen its end beginning, not in revolution, but in revelation. As the train rounded a bend, Shimla disappeared entirely, leaving only mountains and sky. Somewhere in that vanished city, an old woman sat making dolls, weaving stories, watching over her domain with ancient eyes that saw everything and forgot nothing. Hercule Poirot closed his eyes and began to compose his report, knowing that some truths would remain in the mountains, buried like treasure in the village bazaar's eternal shadows. The end.